Alright, I've waited long enough. It's time to talk about the most recent playtest. This weekend just passed, Squad held its 5th playtest for the second time, and that's totally not confusing. Nevertheless, it was finally to play the 5th iteration and batch of changes for the ICO that OWI is fast thrusting upon us and working diligently on. The main addition to Playtest 5 was the addition of the United States Marine Corps and Middle Eastern Alliance faction, along with some minor tweaks and changes along the line. Over the weekend, I put in a good bunch of hours in the playtest both on and off stream, played a bunch of different kits, roles and playstyles to get a good grasp of this one. And as some of you who watch me live will have seen, I was pretty vocal about certain aspects of this playtest, on features that I did like and those that I did not. Like anything, when you have changes, things either get better, or get worse, or stay stagnant, and I certainly noticed all three things during this playtest. I felt certain factions had felt much more polished to the point where some very minor changes and that's them finished, which is an amazing feat, but I also felt some things had either taken a step backwards or just haven't been changed at all and have been left behind by the progression of everything else, which in turn made it feel crap. So that's what we're going to go through in this video, and as you guys know, I like to give a no BS approach to things, and I call things as I see them. So, without further ado, let's go through it. As it stands, I have partaken in every single playtest that's been out to offer on the Infantry Combat Overhaul, be it public or private, and it's been great to not only see how things have changed, but to feel them as well. And the first thing I noticed in this playtest was just how polished the Russian Ground Forces, VDV, and US Army faction felt. They really do feel like they are in a good place, with a good selection and balance through their kits and roles. Their picture-in-picture optics are by far the cleanest to run. Irons and hollows also felt incredibly polished and are well executed. And a few minor tweaks aside, they were by far the most enjoyable factions to use. Now, the few small tweaks I would make to finish off these factions is more to do with actual in-game mechanics now, and these for me would sweep across every single faction, but these three factions would feel finished in an almost instant. But I'll get into that later on in the video. When it came to running the Marines, Canada and Middle Eastern Alliance, you can tell these factions haven't been in the playtest as long. They're more buggy, nowhere near as polished, and you can tell that they just don't feel balanced yet. Canadian optics feel extremely low quality, in fact probably the lowest of the 6, and that made longer range firefights a bit of a chore because everything just looked a bit hazy and covered in Vaseline, which was a shame because playtest 4 they actually felt really clean, so hopefully it's just a minor bug somewhere that's caused this issue. Their weapon handling for the most part does feel really good, especially when you get the C7s with a foregrip. You can really feel that make a difference. I didn't get a chance to run the Timberwolf sniper kit, but I still stand by my previous suggestion of giving snipers and marksman kits an extra pistol mag or two just to help in defensive situations. Now, the Marines were definitely a faction of two halves. The stuff that's essentially the same as the US Army felt great, especially the ACOGs, but the kits with their own optics definitely need a good amount of attention. They're far more wobbly than their counterparts, and they're just so tiny. Just look at this 240 here. The picture you get is so small compared to the 240 of the US Army. Their iron sight M4s, M27s and M16s also get this sort of over-the-stock quick ADS feature, which on initial inspection last week I liked, but in practice it wasn't as fun. There's times I would rather my weapon was brought up properly, but instead I got this wonky option, meaning that I couldn't hit the dude who was 20 meters away from me, because I was essentially firing over him. So I think features like this need to be triggered by a key binding. And finally, factions, Middle Eastern Alliance. I've been calling for an MEA overhaul for quite some time. They're the most unloved faction in game due to their unique weapon handling characteristics and outdated armoured vehicles. And I'll be honest, this would have been the perfect time to give them a bit of love like they did with the Canadian Armed Forces. The games that I did play with and against Middle Eastern Alliance, I only saw them win one game, and that was on Mutahar, where they had heavily dug themselves in with extremely good armor support, making attacking them an absolute nightmare. But every other game, they just got absolutely smashed to bits, and when you saw the end of game screen, they always had 50% less kills and incapacitations. I don't mind that the G3 kicks more than other rifles, but the kick and live squad was already a little bit on the strong side. Now it's been exaggerated even more. I always classed MEA as a faction that suited longer range firefights due to the extra suppression that they give and the stopping power, but the kick was so great that follow-up shots are incredibly hard to get, so most people would generally escape that second shot. Add in the fact that the aim, flinch and noodle armed weapon handling, you've already broken the laws of physics hitting someone in the first place. Their optics are fairly nice to use, but this circle disc in the middle of the optic and the aggressive scope glare just adds to the difficulty. This all said though, the G3 machine gunner kit with the optic, the MG3 and the HK51 with the red dot are all absolutely fantastic to use, and as I was classed as diamond in the rough. That little HK51 has some of the best movement handling of the infantry combat overhaul. Clearing buildings with this constantly ADS'd, it feels absolutely amazing. I know that they dish out more suppression, but it feels like this faction is leaning on that too much, and other than the handful of kits getting the HK51, they have no viable close quarter option, and the lack of a viable CQB option in this faction is really going to hurt them. They just don't feel anywhere near as fun to use, and as I mentioned earlier, despite being a personal Middle Eastern Alliance enjoyer, they are the most unloved faction in game, and this is going to make it even more so. I think of all the factions, MEA is going to not only be the toughest to balance, but the toughest to make more enjoyable without comprehensible changes. So hopefully, as these playtests go on, OWI finds a way to tune them and make them more enjoyable. As for the features and mechanics that I mentioned earlier that if tweaked would finish off certain factions, or just vastly improve the experience and enjoyment of this, the first would be to make picture-in-picture optics just that little bit bigger on the screen. Just an increase of 10 to 15% in size would be enough in all honesty. It would just make things far more comfortably, especially for the longer range firefights that you would see of about 300 meters or upwards, like you get on maps such as Kohat and Talil. Naturally, some factions would need increasing more than others, like the USMC's peephole optics on the M27s for example. But even some of the iron sights and red dot kits could do with being a little bit closer to your eyes, just to help, especially with those 100 meter shots. The next change will be to reduce the jitter when you fire your weapon. If you haven't noticed, all guns do this sort of left right bounce pattern, which is basically just a V shape, but across the board it would be great if it was dialed back just about 20%, especially whilst firing a semi-auto. Maybe a little bit more for iron sights and red dots, but in doing so it would just make everything far more enjoyable to use and just be more intuitive and keep it in that perfect gap between milsim and arcade shooters, because after all that's what squad is. And sticking with weapon handling, one of my biggest gripes right now is the whole wobbly ass rifle when you ADS with and without stamina. I don't mind the idea behind this, but it feels like it's just too long, and there's quite a lot of times you get this really awkward dumb Mexican standoff where two people see each other, ADS, and then it's a game of whose weapon stabilizes first. So if this could be sped up and calmed down just a little bit, it would certainly find that fine balance between what we have now and keeping it fun. And now we move on to my biggest gripe, point fire. This has pretty much gone unchanged since the first playtest. I'm hoping that's because this feature is going in the bin and getting replaced with something that's actually, point fire. What we have is hip firing in an at ease position with two dead arms, hence the gun flying across your screen. Point fire is where your weapon is shouldered firmly, but you're not looking through your irons or optics. So what we've been told we're getting and what we have gotten are two completely different things, and that is a shame. Because when they said we were going to be getting a better and truer point fire system, I was really excited for this. And honestly, for me, it's been by far the biggest letdown of the whole infantry combat overhaul. Now I know some people don't mind or enjoy this absolutely messed up mechanic, and that's all fine and well. We as people do enjoy and like different things. For example, there's people who enjoy cleaning out toilets, and there's a lot of people who don't. That's what makes the world go round. But back on topic, it will be interesting to see where this feature goes in the future, because right now, other than iron sights and pistols, which have the stopping power of a BB gun, there's no true, reliable, or fun close quarters mechanic. Some factions like Canada have the irons on top of their optics, so let us use those for close quarters, for example. And finally, suppression. And oh man, this feels so close to being absolutely perfect. Visually, it is fantastic. Whether you're being shot at or being mortared, it just looks incredible. I did notice there were random times that the visual effect would just hang on for about 10 to 15 seconds for no real rhyme or reason, leaving you with a messed up blurred screen for a while, which was very uncomfortable to deal with. But other than that, I found myself physically ducking at my desk occasionally when something big shot at me. My biggest problem with it though is the flinch mechanic. That feels like it's been robbed straight from Postscriptum, and I have always stated that that was the single most annoying and unfun mechanic I have ever encountered in a first-person shooter game, and now it feels like it's worming its way into Squad. Look, I get the idea behind it, I just feel it's a bit too extreme, especially when mixed in with weapon sway and other things. It just feels like it's overly exaggerated, especially when it's been a few minutes and your arms are floating around like you're a puppet from Team America. But dial that back and make it tail off a bit more smoother, and it will feel much better and make things much more enjoyable. But there are two things that need to be fixed sooner rather than later, and that is performance and whatever the hell this is. I feel like how weapons are bipoded and how your soldier acts and moves while bipoded has slipped through the net here, because it's already completely broken in the live game. Now, with all of these other changes, it's just simply been left behind. But not only that, there's so many things that when you do try to bipod on, your weapon just clips through it, making it impossible to fire without smashing the rock you've now fell inside of. And the fact that you can hover off the side of a building or spin around like a fidget spinner and get stuck on the ground, yeah, you can see why I'm mentioning this now. And performance. Performance has always been Squad's biggest downfall, and I understand that these are just test builds right now, so it won't be as polished as it could be, but this was the first build I had where I would get horrific frame freezes whilst using picture-in-picture optics, and generally I was struggling to get 40 to 50 FPS on some maps. And keep in mind, I'm on a 4070 Ti, that is quite worrying. What they have done, however, is increased server performance. Most games I played saw an average of 28 to 34 TPS, compared to the 18 to 20 most servers on Live Squad have been dealing with for the past 6 to 8 months. This has been a monumental step forwards. On the whole, Playtest 6 was an enjoyable experience if you could look past some of the bugs and trivial things that have annoyed me. It's great to see some of these factions looking much more polished, and there's still some changes and balancing to be done as we go, but OWI have to be careful not to go too far with some of this. Hopefully, once all of this is done, the game modes will get a good going over too, to make them much more engaging and rewarding, but that would be a better and more viable option to increase team play, and hopefully would go hand in hand with the ICO and massively further the enjoyment of infantry gameplay. Remember, Squad bridges the gap between arcade shooters and milsims, and it's always done this really well. If the ICO is done right, it will further that. I just hope they don't rush this, because whilst there's been a lot of good progress, this is nowhere near ready to go live yet. On top of the bugs, there's still the British, the Aussies, militia, and insurgents to add in and test. And those last two factions have a lot of random stuff to test alone. Before we end this video though, I do want to take a quick moment to let you all know that my Squad server, Dead on Dismount, will be live on its new more powerful box, and we will be having a relaunch party on Saturday the 19th of August around 1800 UK time. Part of this is its moving location to New York, so ping for most American-based players won't be affected much, but those in the EU will see a nice little drop in ping. So it would be great to see some of you guys there to get some games in with. More details about this will be posted in the Dead or Dismount Discord. Link should be on the screen right now or in the pinned comment down below. What did you enjoy most about this playtest, or what would you like to see change in the future? I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you all for watching as always. Don't forget to subscribe for more Squad guides, gameplay and updates. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next video, or hopefully in my server on Saturday.